Hello, Ketogenic Longevity Lifestyle Designers. This is Zach here, secretsoflongevity.com. I was just interviewed on my friend Alina's radio show. The show is called Strange Brains, and we talked about diet and nutrition for dealing with specifically ADHD, but also it can be more generally applicable to mental illnesses of varying types. So I'm going to play the audio for you. I'm going to accompany it with some images that I've just taken over the last few weeks and months as a compilation, just to give you something to look at. But you can always just listen to it, not pay attention to the imagery because it's just audio. Also, check out in the drop-down menu for links to her Facebook page, her website, as well as her YouTube channel. I'm also going to link to it right here on the screen so that you can go see what videos she has up. She'll be putting up her radio shows in time on that channel. So ADHD is something that is controversial in some respects, as some people don't believe it exists. However, there are some physiological changes that have been acknowledged as having been what some people just simply have as their brain type, and it can be exacerbated by a number of things, and it's a growing epidemic in our culture. So knowing non-drug type lifestyle measures that we can implement to address these issues is a key thing. So that's what we talked about in this interview, and that's also what she talks about on her website and in her radio shows. So check those out and enjoy the interview.
Welcome to today's episode of Strange Brains, all about ADHD and Asperger's and anything to do with productivity or strategies around the brain. And I'm your host, Alina Kislenko, an ADHD, Asperger's, and life coach here in Guelph. So here in the studio today, it's a pretty special day. I have a guest. His name is Zach Martin-Kilgour, and he's worked in the holistic health community for nearly a decade, and he's been making YouTube videos for a living for about the last 3 years. And you can catch him vlogging about health on his YouTube channel at Secrets of Longevity. So he's here in the studio with me today, and we're going to talk a bit about ADHD and health, and all about kind of nutrition and diet. So hi, Zach.
Hi, and thank you for having me on. I'm really excited to be part of your show.
Awesome, me too. So first of all, let's just start just give me an overview of kind of ADHD and diet. What do you think makes sense?
Well, I've done work with people both in consultations, but I've talked a little bit about it on my channel at times. It's not the main focus of what I do, but the few people I have interacted with who have mental health issues of varying types have often benefited from many of the recommendations I have about general health. And a major one of this is actually the use of animal foods in abundance in the diet. It's not going to be for everyone, of course, but there are some people who thrive on a very high-fat, high animal protein diet. And this provides really good fuel for the brain in the form of ketones, which is a little bit controversial in the modern health community, but there's actually a lot of research that backs up the idea that these unique forms of fuel for our body has a very beneficial impact on a wide variety of types of mental health issues.
Mm-hmm. And can I just ask you a bit about you just mentioned something about ketones. Can you tell me more about that and how that affects ADHD?
Yeah, so most people are well aware that the body primarily runs on carbohydrates or glucose. And the idea of ketones is that you shift your body over to burning fat as its main fuel. And the body doesn't do so well trying to do both at once, so it's either dominant on one or the other. Mm-hmm. And when people want to lose weight, which is the most commonly understood reasons for going on a ketogenic diet, a lot of people are familiar with Atkins or a paleo diet, and these can be ketogenic diets. And so when you have a surplus of fat in the diet and under 150 to 100 grams of carbohydrates or less, that's going to put you into a place where your body prefers to burn fat, and that's going to give you the benefits that it has on your mental health.
Right. So just to get that straight, this kind of diet is connected to less than 100 grams of, was it carbs?
Yeah. And
per day?
That it doesn't have to be a strict thing. It's just when you keep it that low, that's what allows you to stay in ketosis. When you start going above that amount, you're going to start entering into normal carbohydrate burning, and it's going to be sort of going back and forth between the two, and that causes more problems than just sticking to one way or the other.
Makes sense. So definitely, so eating 100 grams or less-ish of carbs, and what are you doing with the rest of your calories?
You're getting it primarily from fat and then some from protein. So a big mistake a lot of people make is with low-carb diets is they think, oh, I've got to eat a lot of protein. And you don't want to be focused on the protein. You want to be focused on saturated fat.
That sounds very controversial.
It is. But
Mm-hmm.
if you're prepared to hear me out, I can
Yes.
definitely give you the information as to why I believe this is very beneficial for some people.
Mm-hmm. That sounds great. Tell me more.
All right. Well, the main thing is that there's been a ton of research on the areas of depression and violent behavior around high-fat diets. So people who have low cholesterol end up having higher rates of suicide, higher rates of violent crime, and that's just sort of the thing that just first came to my mind when I was beginning to look into this. But the deeper I looked, the more I found that ADD, there's actually been research on ADD being connected with low fat, but also excess polyunsaturated fat, which is
Mm-hmm.
often the fat we hear as being the most healthful,
Mm-hmm.
but there are some negative drawbacks with the excess consumption of polyunsaturated fats like omega-3, omega-6, when if we have these mental health issues. So it was a study out of the University of Helsinki in Finland that found that omega-6 fatty acid has been connected with ADHD as well as adult dyslexia. So this, among others, starts to show us the picture that just consuming lots of these polyunsaturated fats, omega-6 and omega-3, can actually have a negative side effect on the brain.
Gotcha. Okay. And that's the stuff that we're told to have more of?
Yeah, I mean,
Commonly,
a lot
yeah.
of people talk about fish oil, which can be great for the brain, of course. But when you get into the plant fats, which you see in seed oils largely, but also when you have a high grain-based diet, you're getting excess omega-6s. And these are both inflammatory as well as being anti-clear thought promoting.
Mm-hmm. And we need a lot of clear thoughts in ADD for sure.
Yes, very true.
All right, and I just wanted to learn a bit more about, you're saying this thing about ketosis, where our body is processing what we're eating a bit differently, and I just want to learn more about how that impacts memory and concentration.
Yeah. So what they've done in some studies with rats is they've found that rats that are in the midst of ketosis have been able to complete mazes quicker. And what I've found from my own experiments with myself when I choose to go on, I'm not on ketosis all the time. It's not the best for my personal constitution, but it does work for a lot of people quite well. And I've noticed that the concentration goes up because with a high carbohydrate diet, you're having very erratic blood sugar. So this kind of leads to crashes in the middle of the day. You have to eat every 2 to 3 hours. Whereas when you're on a high fat diet or higher fat diet, you're getting a lot more stable because it's a very slow burning fuel. It's kind of like throwing a log on the fire. Whereas if you're trying to run on carbohydrates all the time, it's like constantly putting kindling on the fire.
Gotcha. Right. And I heard something about how the brain does well with protein, how it's important to focus and concentration. Is that connected?
Well, the protein is a slow burning fuel.
Right.
Protein is the least easy fuel for your body to use. It has the most byproducts created. Fat is actually the easiest fuel for your body to use, the least amount of byproducts created. I wouldn't recommend using protein for a fuel because of the harsh effect it has on the body. When we look at our ancestors and the diets they consumed, it was either a high carbohydrate or high fat or somewhere in between. It was rarely high protein.
Ah, okay.
And for example, the indigenous Americans, they would often consider that fat is the most prized part of an animal. So they'd be looking for the oldest animals to hunt because they'd have the largest fat reserves on their back, for instance, if you're looking at a moose.
And I guess if we can talk about some fears people might have kind of connected to going into this ketosis direction and maybe also how one would do that.
Yeah, so the mainstream medical situation as it currently stands, although it's definitely shifting and there's a lot more alternative thought around this nowadays, is still very much on the belief that saturated fat and cholesterol causes heart disease. And there are actually, unbeknownst to the media's focus, a lot of research that shows the contrary. And without getting too specific on the depth that is that whole discussion in and of itself, we can just look to a few studies such as the largest meta-analysis on saturated fat that has ever been done in the 2010 issue of the Journal of Clinical Nutrition that found that there was no correlation with saturated fat and heart disease. So when we look into heart disease, we see the major factors that cause it are a lot of people have heard of HDL and LDL cholesterol. And
what do those stand for?
high density lipoprotein and low-density lipoprotein.
Ah, you actually knew. Awesome. Go on.
Yeah,
I
of
was like,
course.
that sounds really tricky. Good memory.
And what makes it even more confusing is that low-density lipoprotein, which everyone's calling bad cholesterol, is actually composed of more than one thing. So there's actually small, dense, hard LDL and large, fluffy LDL.
Huh.
And it's the small, dense, hard LDL that gets trapped in the arteries and forms plaque and eventually causes inflammation.
Right. And how about in the ketogenic diet, that doesn't happen?
Well, what we see with animal foods in general when we consume them is that they raise HDL levels, which prevents heart disease, and they raise LDL a little bit, but they don't raise the small, dense LDL. That's actually raised by rogue sugars and other things, which elevate triglycerides, which is what's transported by those smaller LDL particles.
Gotcha. And so in this diet, I guess, like, I've heard a lot of diets that are for ADD, they usually include low sugar anyway. So I guess this is one of those other diets where you would want to kind of stay away from sugar as well.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Because sugar is a carbohydrate. You could have a very small amount. Like
right. There's only 100 grams-ish. So what does 100 grams of carbs look like?
It would look like maybe 4 bananas. I mean, not many people are going to eat 4 bananas in a day anyways. That would just be crazy. But if you just think of that many calories, which is about 400 calories, you can use that in other forms. And you're also going to get carbohydrates from vegetables. And on a low-carb diet, you should be eating a lot of vegetables anyways.
Okay, so a lot of vegetables aren't too high in carbs?
Well, they're low, but you are going to get some. So you want to take that into account if you're doing a whole program like this.
Gotcha. Okay, so what else are you eating? Okay, so we're not eating too many bananas. Check. I don't even like bananas. What am I eating then the rest of the time?
Well, it's basically an omnivorous diet. It's very difficult to do a vegan version of this, of course, but it is possible to do a vegetarian version of it. So that's going to look like a dominance of animal foods, if in the vegetarian form, or pescatarian, as I know that's what you choose to eat.
Right, I eat fish.
Yeah, so that can look like, obviously, fish, but also a lot of eggs, dairy, although dairy does have a lot of carbohydrates in it, so it would be, or that's milk, but you can have fermented forms of it, which is when the bacteria eats up the lactose, which
like
lowers
kefir?
the carbo. Yes,
Oh,
kefir,
okay, good.
yogurt, cheese, butter, those are all dairy products which are low in carbohydrates. So with all these animal foods, it's important to, if you can find them in your area, it's important to get pasture-raised forms of these. So that means the animal is out there eating grass as it's designed to do. In the case of chickens, they're also eating bugs. The idea that we can get animal foods eating grains that are healthy is a modern technology, I guess, in the agricultural world, and it's not one that develops a good nutrient density in the final product, and actually makes animal foods much more inflammatory when they're not eating the food they're designed to eat.
Oh, okay, so you're not a supporter of the normal kind of dairy and animal products, like grain-fed. You think another direction, the pasture-raised?
Yeah, that's a very important factor, and that's what, when a lot of people who do go to vegetarianism or veganism and they have better results in their health, it's largely because before they were eating factory-farmed animal foods.
So we're all about getting away from factory farming, because then that leads to inflammation. And is inflammation in any way connected to ADD potentially, like in the brain?
It very much could. I mean, inflammation is rampant in a lot of people's diets these days, and it has a big impact on a lot of things. And the mind is very sensitive, obviously, to any disharmony that's going on in the body. So it's indirect, but it is definitely related.
Neat. Okay. And so tell us more kind of what we'd be eating, say, if we're on an animal diet too, or vegan diet, whatever you'd like to explore more.
Well, I definitely think veganism wouldn't work in this way, because you can't rely on plant fats. The one plant fat that does work, because it's predominantly saturated fat, is coconut products. So coconut meat, coconut oil, coconut butter, coconut milk. The other things you can eat if you're vegetarian, I already covered the dairy and the eggs. But you can have some things like olive oil or olives and avocados. But those do have a fairly higher polyunsaturated fat content. So again, those shouldn't be the dominant factors.
Right. So yeah, what kind of things have polyunsaturated fat in them? So you're saying oils?
Virtually all plant foods.
Okay.
So it's the seed oils, which are the big thing in our modern diets, that are full of these. So any processed foods, fast food generally is made with canola oil or soybean oil, all these things, and they're very like I've been saying, inflammatory, but also they don't really build the body much. So the best sources of fat are going to be, in my opinion, meat.
Mm-hmm.
So that can be pasture-raised beef, goat, lamb, also chicken when it's pasture-raised is wonderful. You can make bone broth out of the bones of all these animals, eating the marrow, getting some of the organ meats is also great.
Mm-hmm.
And pork, of course, too, if that's something that you're open to consuming.
That's really good to know. And for you, in your own experience, have you noticed, I know that you've spent some time as a raw vegan, vegetarian, and now a meat eater on something I think called the paleo diet. You do kind of this kind of ketogenic diet. What have you found is the best for your own mental clarity?
Definitely getting enough animal foods. For me, it's not such a tight issue that I have to be consuming or always be in that state of ketosis.
Mm-hmm.
What works for me is carbohydrates here and there, just being very loose with it. There's
Mm-hmm.
times when I just listen to my body and do things, but then there's times where I would go on a stricter regimen if I'm finding I need to do certain things
Mm-hmm.
with that. So there's definitely some people that this does not work for. And in those cases, then you do need to consume more carbohydrates, whether it's from fruit, wild rice, any source of carbohydrate that would, in my opinion, be less harsh on the body. Like a lot of grains tend to be very hard for some people because of either the gluten or the other anti-nutrients which bind to minerals and cause mineral deficiencies.
Gotcha. Okay.
Potatoes are another great, and sweet potatoes are great sources of carbohydrates for those that...
Oh, I like those better than bananas.
Yeah.
Very good. And so I know you told me before, when you're raw vegan, how did you feel mentally?
Well, yeah, I had a lot of ups and downs.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult for me to maintain a constant level of blood sugar in order to feel focused and clear all the time. I started to look into higher fat diets when I was a raw vegan, and I was trying to do that at the same time, but I was relying on nuts and seeds, and that is really disastrous, what most people find, because the high omega-6 content is inflammatory, and the nuts and seeds in general have anti-nutrients. So what we tend to say in the paleo community or the low-carb community is that nuts and seeds can be used as condiments more than staple foods.
Gotcha. And when you say paleo, what do you mean by that as a paleo diet? What is that?
Well, that's the idea of a diet based around the philosophy that our ancestors ate a certain types of foods that you can find in nature, and a lot of these more agricultural foods weren't able to be found in nature. So all the grains, beans, legumes, in some cases dairy. I mean, some people do great on dairy, and it's actually the only food that scientists agree has been has caused genetic changes post-agriculture. So there's actually genetic adaptations for some cultures to be able to consume dairy, whereas others don't do well on dairy at all. And that's totally up to you as an individual whether that works for you or not.
And just because I know there's a bit of a debate around dairy, say there was a documentary made, Forks Over Knives, and they just talking about how bad dairy is for you. And do you have any thoughts on kind of what maybe is missing in that equation?
Yeah, well, their research, the one individual in particular, Dr. T. Colin Campbell, which some people may be familiar, wrote the book The China Study. He's extremely biased in that his research didn't conclude, or rather he drew conclusions from things that he didn't even look at. So he was talking about veganism when none of the cultures he studied in China were actually vegans. Some had very low animal foods in their diet, but there's blogs out there where people have taken the same data that he used and shown the complete opposite. There was even one culture he left out called Tuoli in China because it was just such an anomaly. He thought it shouldn't be included, but they were a culture that consumed basically bread, tons of dairy, up to 2 pounds of dairy a day, and meat. They had over 3,000 calories a day from dairy and meat, and they had extremely low rates of all diseases. They were vibrantly healthy, but he decided to omit that. So I feel there's a lot of bias and limited thinking and bad science in some of those sort of vegan propagandist type.
Gotcha. And I know that also when we've discussed this previously, kind of before this episode, that you've mentioned too, that with some of those studies, they were only testing about kind of typically raised dairy and meat, right? So that's a bit different than what you're talking about. Makes sense. Yeah.
So I don't want to get too technical, but essentially they were looking at one isolated nutrient called casein from dairy, and it is the type one casein found in Holstein cows, which is a hybridized form of casein. What's found in human breast milk, in goat milk, in non-hybridized cow milk from like Guernsey or Jersey cows.
Mm-hmm.
By Holstein, I mean the white and black cows. They're the least.
It's a Holstein.
They're the most far removed from nature in terms of their breeding.
Mm-hmm.
And their dairy has a high amount of this casein, which has been found in research in Australia to be very implicated in higher rates of cancer, heart disease, strokes, and also all these major issues, allergies as well. So his entire research is based on this one type of casein, when that's not the same type of casein found in other types of dairy. And furthermore, he also took that research and just assumed that people would have the same reaction to other forms of animal protein which don't have the same effect. It's pretty ludicrous. And that's actually why none of his research from the China study got published in any medical journal.
Good to know. All right. Well, we're going to take a quick attention break because I know we have a certain attention span here as ADDers. So we're going to take a moment, stretch your legs. We'll be right back. And welcome back to the Strange Brains radio show, where we talk about everything to do with ADHD and Asperger's and anything else to do with the mind, or to be more productive, to be more efficient as human beings. And today in the studio, I have Zach Martin-Kilgour, who has his YouTube channel, Secrets of Longevity, and has been very active in the holistic health community for the last 10 years or so. So he's got a lot that he said so far about different kind of diet. We've talked quite a bit about the ketogenic diet and what that means. So listen to the recordings if you want to. If you just tuned in now, we have the recordings in the archives. So we're also talking a bit about like if we want to have this kind of diet that is good or has been proven in some ways to be better for ADHD and Asperger's and that kind of mental state. How do we start going in that direction? What do we do?
The first thing I always tell people to do is to get really familiar with the concepts around it. Obviously, there's way more to this than what we could talk about here today. So there's a few sites I could recommend checking out.
Please do.
It's my own YouTube channel. I've talked about this at times. There's a great site called marksdailyapple.com, which is run by Mark Sisson, a sort of prominent figure in the paleo diet world. There's also another great one called Primal Body-Primal Mind. That's another popular author. And if you're really heady and into the science, I'd recommend the book Good Calories, Bad Calories by Gary Taubes, and that's Taubes.
Mm-hmm.
These have been some of the most influential people on me for showing me the science and ideas around how beneficial this way of eating can be. And when it comes to what you actually do to transition to eating this way,
mm-hmm.
You just start adding things in. Instead of thinking of it in the mindset that we need to suddenly cut out all these carbohydrates and do all these things, I often find it's easiest to make just transitions by adding things in, and other things will fall by the wayside in time. So start looking for sources of pasture-raised animal foods and start cooking with them. Don't be afraid of egg yolks. Don't be afraid of meat that has a thick layer of fat on the edge.
Mm-hmm.
Don't go for lean ground beef. Go for the full-fat ground beef. So all these things, when you start adding them in, are very easy to do.
Stop buying stuff low-fat.
Yes, definitely.
I hear that those low-fat foods also tend to have a lot more chemicals to make them low-fat, or a lot more sugars.
They often put sugars in. It doesn't take chemicals to take off fat in dairy, for instance. But what's often in the fat is the most nutritious part. So in dairy, for example, you have the vitamins A, D, E, and K, which are the best parts for building your bones, building all sorts of tissues in the body. And when you take out the fat, whether it's meat or dairy, you're losing out on the most nutrient-dense portion of those foods.
And I guess just to end this off, what are some examples of dishes connected to the ketogenic diet that you'd suggest? Let's make us all hungry and stuff.
Well, some of the simplest things to do, I find, is just to make a salad and then throw some type of meat on top. So you also have to consider that when you don't have bread and all these other things, you need to eat a decent amount of fat to actually to get enough calories and to feel satiated. So I might take a whole pound of ground beef, make hamburger patties out of it, make a massive salad, and put those on top, or break them up and put them on top, and then pour some sort of homemade dressing over it, and it's really delicious. Of course, you can do traditional stir-fried veggies with various types of meat. I really also enjoy making smoothies with raw milk. It's something that's a little hard to find in Ontario, of course, but if you're listening to this and you're in a place where that's easily accessible, that's another huge benefit to dairy is to actually get it in the raw state.
Oh.
You can get raw cheeses in virtually anywhere in the world, because once a dairy food is aged over 60 days, it's actually legal in those areas where raw dairy is illegal.
So raw dairy is just illegal here, right, in Ontario?
Yeah,
Yes.
if you are able to find a cow share, which is what I'm a part of, then you can get it as you technically have a share in the cow, almost like you're renting it, and the farmer's then giving you the service of providing you with the milk, and you're just paying for him to milk it for you.
Okay,
so that's
good
a
to
little
know.
loophole.
Tip, all right, loophole. And just a quick, can you mention why raw milk is better than normal pasteurized milk?
Well, the pasteurization actually destroys a wide variety of things in the milk, which help in digesting the milk. So lactase is an enzyme that's present in milk. A lot of people with lactose intolerance find that raw milk is actually digested for them because it has the proper enzyme for its digestion in it.
Oh, so raw milk is good for people who are lactose intolerant, potentially.
It's one way that they can drink milk, but there's still some people who are so intolerant of milk that even raw milk doesn't work for them.
Okay.
But it's basically, you have to look at your heritage. If you're Eastern or Western European or certain parts of Africa or Indian, you generally have the ability to digest dairy, whereas if you're native or you're from some area in the world where there's not a history of milk drinking, most of Asia, for example, as well, you're going to have a more difficult time with it, of course.
Okay, so raw milk is better in those cases as well. So
Yeah.
if you're not just naturally able to digest. Awesome. Thank you so much, Zach. We've covered so much here today, and I'm definitely going to go and do lots more research and talk to Zach about my questions about it further. And if you have any questions towards me or Zach, there's my Facebook page at ADHD Interrupted on Facebook, so just ADHD Interrupted. And then there's also the website, www.adhdinterrupted.com, so you can put any questions that you have there, and we'll possibly address it on a future show. I think Zach is very likely to be back. We've got a lot more stuff to cover in terms of ADHD and nutrition. And then Zach's website, if you can tell us what that is.
Well, I often just give people my YouTube channel because that's where I post the most too.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in the midst of some web updates, so just check me out on YouTube if you're interested in watching me live on video. It's youtube.com/secrets of longevity.
Awesome. All right. Thanks again so much, and have a great day, guys.
Thank
we'll
you
see
for
you next
having me
week.
on.
You're very welcome. We'll have you on again.
So that's it. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments below what you thought about these ideas. And also consider making any purchases through the links below in the affiliates, which always helps support me continue putting out such great content as this. And also check out Alina's links, of course, as well. So with that, take care and embrace life without limits.